G'day mateys, I am Jacaro Toro, and on this channel I talk about Australian Aboriginal languages, with a special focus on the languages of the Pilbara region of Western Australia, which is where I have been to study Indigenous languages. And speaking of the Pilbara region, today I thought we'd look at the names for the town, or perhaps a small city these days, of Port Hedland, which is in the Pilbara region and which is Australia's most important unknown city. Unknown by and large in the world outside of Australia, but nevertheless extremely important for Australia. And why is that? Well, it so happens that they have the largest iron ore deposits in the whole world, in the region around Port Hedland. It is a port city, obviously, and it so happens that all this iron ore ships out through Port Hedland. And Port Hedland is the largest port in Australia, if you consider the number of tons of goods and material that is shipped out every year. So this place is extremely important. It is in fact the iron ore deposits of Western Australia that is keeping Australia afloat. It has been suggested earlier by people in Western Australia that that state should become its own country. Trust me, never going to happen. The reason is the iron ore deposits in this area. Yes, so the town of Port Hedland was gazetted in 1896 on traditional Ngara territory. So this is the English name then. This is the Ngara name. And this the more recent Nyangumarta name. So if we start from the top here, why is this place called Port Hedland in English? Well, it is a port, obviously, has been from the start. And the reason for this part is that Swedish ship's captain Fredrik Hedlund, as far as we know, was the first one earlier in the 1800s to note that this would be an ideal place for a harbor. Fredrik Hedlund, he settled in Perth, in the Perth region, and his descendants live there to this day. But when the town was gazetted, there was a slight misunderstanding as to what his surname was. So we get Port Hedland rather than Port Hedlund. I think it's fun with this Swedish connection here, though. Anyway, next we have the Mara name, Mara Pikurrinya. Now, first of all, we have a toponym marker here in the end. There are a couple of these toponym markers, and I intend to discuss them more in a later video. So, but Mara means hand. This refers to 5 inlets out in the Port Hedland harbour. And Pigori means bad news. Why bad news? I don't know. Could it perhaps have something to do with the extreme climate of the area? You see, in Port Hedland, the wind either blows from the desert, and when it does, it is of course really hot, 40 degrees plus hot and absolutely no humidity in the air. Or the wind blows from the sea. That lowers the temperature quite a bit, of course, but humidity also becomes much higher. And they have a cyclone season each year. They get a number of cyclones each year. You should see how they build houses in Port Hedland these days. They have these really sturdy steel frames that they build houses around, and presumably they fasten them really well in the ground so that the houses won't blow away during cyclone season. And these steel frames mean that they have really bad mobile reception indoors. But anyway, the climate is extreme. Originally, this was the name of only one place in the Port Hedland area. There were over a dozen named places. But this one then took over as the name for the town. And originally it applied to the ridge that Red Bank Power Station was built on, for those who are familiar with Port Hedland. This ridge was always easily accessible, but most of the land around it was very inaccessible because of mangroves and because most of the land around it was flooded at high tide. But the ridge could always be reached. Yes, so Mara Pikurrinya. You most often hear it in that form. And as I said, I will discuss this toponym marker in a later video. Now, in the 1940s, the Aboriginal tribes of the area started to organize in order to work for improved conditions, living and working conditions. Each tribe had its own language, and they needed a lingua franca. Nyangumarta became that lingua franca, and it started to take over fairly rapidly, with children switching from their traditional tribal languages to Nyangumarta. And today, Nyangumarta is slowly but surely being replaced by English, which is the dominant language in the region these days. Anyway, in Nyangumarta, Port Hedland is called Ngaru, and it so happens that this is also a Ngara word. Ngaru is the Ngara word for fine white sand that you find on beaches. And the Nyangumarta speakers started to use this word for the beach just outside of Port Hedland, and then later, by extension, for the whole town. So that way we got three very distinct names. And as I said, Port Hedland was built on traditional Ngara territory. They chose not to include it in the native title claim, though. The Ngara tribe chose not to include it for various reasons. But it was nevertheless built on Ngara territory. And that will be all for today, I think. So, see you later.